as well as Greg and Jared. Okay, Jared's joining us from UNISA. Great. And Prinavan, remind me where you from again?
DUT, if I'm not mistaken, eh?
Ah, yes.
Yes,
DUT.
that's correct, Yuri.
And Anari from UFS. Okay, cool. And then we've got colleagues from UNISA, and UNISA I know have also used the Invigilator app. So I think when we come to maybe at some point, you can also share your experiences from that side. Thanks, Ingrid. So Ingrid says, sure. And welcome, Wilma.
Hello, Vilma, my fellow UJ colleague.
Hello, Yuri. I hope you're well.
I'm fine. How are you?
Good, thank you. Just snooping in the background and being a support.
You do that. Always nice to have you in the background.
Good stuff. I'm sure I'll learn something more. Thank you for the invite.
We are giving those who are joining just a few more minutes, so we'll start at 5 past sharp. So please be patient, and we'll start in 2 minutes. It looks like we know each other in a way from different places. Hi, Yanni.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So I think I was hoping that some people show up, but I think we just continue where they find us. We continue with them and they can ask questions. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Irene Mawel. I'm with Emerge Africa, and today we are going to have a session on lessons learned from implementing a new tool during an emergency situation, the Invigilator at Rhodes University, and I'm sure there are other universities that are also using it. We have our facilitators, I would say, in today's session, which is Dr. Nicola Palitt, Yuri Vessels, and Neil Crum, and they'll be introducing themselves some more. Just a few things that will be recording the session. So if you're uncomfortable with the being recorded, you can change your name. And we'll be sharing the link of the recording in Facebook, and also it will be available later in YouTube. So that is what we'll be doing. And now I wish to hand over to Nicola, and please introduce yourselves and take over the session. Thank you so much. Enjoy yourselves.
Thank you, Irene. Yes, next slide, please, Neil. Awesome. So I'm Dr. Nicola Palitt, and I work with Neil, and I will let Neil also have some airtime for introductions, but we're in CHERTL, Center for Higher Education, Research and Teaching and Learning, and more specifically in the EdTech team. And we've been supporting lecturers and students with remote teaching and learning at the institution. Yes, and one of the things that we piloted last year was the Invigilator, and rolling out this year. And yes, I'll get Neil to share a few words, and then over to Yuri.
Oh, hi, everybody. I'm Neil. I think Nicola has already introduced exactly, where we are. We're in a nice space where we can hopefully start to look back at 2020 and see what happened. So, Yuri, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nicola and Neil. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Yuri Wessels. I'll just switch on my camera for a little bit. I like it to be a slightly more personal so that you can see my face and see that I'm a real person. I'm a lecturer from the University of Johannesburg, and I'm also one of the creators and founders of the Invigilator application that we're going to share a little bit more about today. Thank you for making the time to join us this afternoon, and we hope it's going to be a valuable and informative session. Thanks very much, Neil. And Nicola, I don't know whether there's anything else you'd like to add before we get going.
Oh, nothing to add. I'm sure you can get going. And just to let folks know that you can ask questions as we go in the chat, and whoever's not presenting, we'll facilitate as we go, but we'll also have time at the end for some more questions. So back to you, Yuri.
Thanks very much, Nicola. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start off with just a little bit of a discussion regarding where we started, how this started, where my interests lie in this specific field. So I think it's important to note that last year during March and April, when we were forced into a hard lockdown, all of the universities in South Africa were facing a similar crisis, and that was that we all had to move into an online space very, very soon. Literally within a matter of a week or two, most universities had to convert all of their face-to-face programs into full online modules for all practical purposes. Now, as I am lecturing at the University of Johannesburg, a few colleagues and myself immediately realized that with the move to online, and more specifically online assessments, there are a number of risks that we were not sure how to mitigate and how to address. And these risks specifically related to the assessment or assessments in an online environment, and more specifically assessments for certification, where we actually issue degrees and qualification based on the assessment. So obviously high stakes examinations that took place during the course of last year, and we had to do all of it in an online environment where we had very little control over what was happening while students are writing the assessments. So in a nutshell, the risk to the academic integrity of modules were severely impacted, and that was specifically because of the online nature of the assessments that we had to facilitate. We got together as a number of colleagues, and we started talking about this problem and about these risks that we are facing. And we wanted to do some research on how academics can mitigate these risks in an online environment. We specifically identified a couple of risks. Firstly, we were worried about the identity of students writing an assessment. Assessments and exams that take place via LMSs are open to the risk of third parties actually writing the assessments on behalf of one another. So we weren't sure of the identity of students writing the assessments because it was so easy to log into the LMS with another student's login credentials, and then first completing the assessment on their behalf, and then logging in with your own credentials and writing the assessment on your behalf. That was the one risk that we were really worried about. And over and above that, obviously, we were also worried about whether students are obtaining assistance from somebody during the assessment and whether they are helping one another when attempting these exams and tests. We started doing some research, and we realized that at that stage, the only solution that was available in the market was online proctoring solutions or fully online proctoring solutions, which we then started doing some research on. Now, I trust at this stage, everybody would know what these fully online proctoring solutions are. It's basically computer-based software that works on your PC, so on your laptop computer, whereby students are being invigilated and watched while they are writing their assessments. So in theory, this sounds like a good solution, as lecturers will have more control over the assessment environment. However, once we started doing our research, we realized it's not all moonshine and roses. So Neil, if we can move to the next slide. When doing our research, we realized that there were a lot of emerging debates taking place, and that there already was a lot of literature available on these specific topics. a lot of people were not very keen on these proctoring solutions, and it was specifically because of the privacy of students, the surveillance that's taking place, students that are being watched all of the time. There were a lot of complaints about this technology being discriminatory in nature, especially towards women, and more specifically women that have children and that are working in environments that might not be conducive to a quiet space for them to be writing their assessments in. There was also a term that was phrased where they started calling these type of technologies cop shit, where students were being watched all the time and they were monitored and they were tracked, and therefore students were really getting uncomfortable with the fact that they are being watched all the time. Now, it's a very difficult thing to balance because there are very obvious concerns about the academic integrity of qualifications, which more specifically lied exactly in the assessment space, where we as lecturers could not guarantee the academic integrity of our modules and of our qualifications because of the fact that we did not have control over the assessment environment. So taking all of this into account, there were a lot of critique for the solutionism and for finding solutions that can work. So you had these two opposites in this debate. So on the one hand, you had the academics that said, but we do not have a choice. We have to enforce these technologies in order to ensure the academic integrity of our qualifications. And on the other hand, you had the students and certain academics that said that this is unacceptable and the way in which this is done is completely out of line. And therefore, there were people that just refused to actually participate in some of these initiatives. The reality, however, is unfortunately that students do act unethical. And as lecturers, we do have a responsibility to implement certain measures to protect our qualifications and to protect the academic integrity of our modules. We also realized that the South African context is quite different to other countries, and therefore we realized that what might work in a first world country would not necessarily work in South Africa. We then started doing some research on the full proctoring solutions, and we started looking into whether that could possibly work in our context and whether it could work for the modules that we were actually presenting on at the University of Johannesburg. And we realized that there are a number of issues that we experience in South Africa, and a number of reasons why full proctoring solutions, unfortunately, is just not practical to roll out, and it's just not practical to use. I've listed these proctoring issues and problems that we are experiencing in South Africa. And initially we thought it was mainly a third world issue, but as we started working with this application that we've developed, we have soon realized that there are similar concerns and similar issues even in first world countries. And these issues are that the proctoring solutions require each and every student to have a laptop device. Now, if we just think about the South African context, and if you think about the students you are lecturing, you would realize that unfortunately a large number of students that we teach do not have access to a laptop device. Students also need a constant internet connection for these full proctoring solutions to work, as these full proctoring tools stream the video data up to the proctoring servers and databases, and therefore you also needed a very strong internet speed. Now, we also know that a lot of our students are not living in environments where they have got access to strong internet, where they do not have access to lots of data, and that we also know that data costs in South Africa is a big problem. So therefore, we have to be very data conscious in whatever solutions we try to implement and whatever solutions we're trying to roll out in our institutions. And last but not least, we also found that these proctoring solutions more often than not come at a very exorbitant cost. These proctoring solutions often charge per student per hour, and we just realized very soon that it is extremely expensive and that we just do not have the budget to actually pull this off. We then realized that we've got no choice but to start looking at other alternatives. And we then started looking at how we can develop a tool that can work in the South African context, that can work for our universities, that is not as invasive as full proctoring, and that do not have the stigma attached to the full proctoring solutions where students' privacy is becoming an issue, and where students are feeling that there's a big invasion on their privacy. And we soon realized that we have to start looking at a solution that is mobile phone based. And we then started brainstorming, and we came up with an idea and a product that we've subsequently developed that we call the Invigilator. So Neil, we can go to the next slide. And colleagues, what you will see on the next slide is just a short summary of what the Invigilator application is. So it's a mobile phone application that works on a smartphone. So from the get-go, we said that there are a few very important matters that we need to address. So we said it has to work on a smartphone because we know that most of our students have got access to a smartphone. In the very unlikely event of a student not having a smartphone, it's also a device that's very readily available to actually borrow. So if you don't have a smartphone and you need to borrow a phone from a relative or a friend for that duration, it's not the end of the world. But we've subsequently found that the vast majority of students do have access to some sort of smartphone. So this application works on entry-level smartphones as well. We immediately said that this solution cannot require a constant internet connection because we know that that internet connections in South Africa are unreliable, firstly, and that it is expensive to stream a lot of data. So it has to be data light, and this tool has to use very, very little data. It cannot be a very large app that takes up a lot of space on your phone. It cannot use a lot of battery power because we're battling with a load shedding in South Africa, and where students might be in a situation where they've got to write an assessment without having access to power. We said it has to integrate with the different LMS platforms so that lecturers can use it with the different LMS platforms that are being rolled out at different universities. And we said that it has to be cost effective. It cannot be an expensive solution, and it cannot be nearly as expensive as full proctoring solutions. So that is where we started off. And during the course of last year, since about April to September, we developed this mobile phone application. And if we move to the next slide, the colleagues will see that I've just listed a number of the main functionalities in the application. And what we wanted to do firstly is we wanted to be able to verify the identity of the students writing the assessment, to ensure that there is no third parties writing an assessment on behalf of students. And we're doing that through means of selfies being taken during an assessment. So students aren't watched for the full duration of the test, but at certain random intervals during an assessment, students have to take a selfie. They're getting notified by the application that they've got to take a selfie. And we then match that selfie through means of advanced facial recognition software or technology to a master photo of that specific student that we have in the database. So for all of the assessments, we then match those selfies taken to ensure that it matches to the master photo that we have in our database, in order for us to confirm that it is the correct student writing the assessment. The application also takes a random audio recording, so the students don't know when they are recorded. And that the main aim of that is to ensure that students are not working together and that they're not obtaining assistance from one another during a test. So students have to remain quiet. And therefore, the technology that we used is advanced speech detection software to specifically pick up speech during one of those recordings. So then on our dashboard afterwards, the lecturer would see a report of all of the audio recordings where speech was detected, and a student can then go and listen. Once again, we do take into account that not all of our students live in certain areas and do not have living conditions conducive to a quiet space for writing assessments. And therefore, we always try to just reassure students that it's not a problem, even if speech is detected in the background, as long as the lecturer can pick up that the speech that was detected is not relating to the assessment, you do not have to worry. So even though they are recorded, if speech is detected in the background, it's very easy for a lecturer to quickly determine that it's random background noises and random background speech, and that nobody is talking to the student about the test, that the student is writing. And therefore, even though they are recorded, we're telling students not to worry about the fact that they are being recorded as long as they don't speak about the test. Furthermore, the application tracks the out-of-app time. So what that means is students are not allowed to leave the application for the duration of the assessment. And we're doing that so that they cannot access WhatsApp or emails, or that they cannot communicate with other students and take photos of the test and send that on. So the moment that a student leaves the application, once again on the lecturer dashboard, it's flagged, and a lecturer can then afterwards investigate specific instances where students had left the application for long periods of time, because that would obviously then be suspicious behavior. We also have customized instructions. So depending on the nature of your assessment, the lecturers can then ask students to take photos of, for example, an ID or a student card. We can ask a student to take a photo of the script that they're busy with, if it's a scan and upload assessment where they've got to write out the assessment by hand. So they can then take photos of that. And once again, we can ensure that the student is actually busy writing the assessment. It's important to also note that these photos do not take a lot of time, and that we do not, that students are not inundated with requests, and that it basically actually detracts from their concentration. So normally we would not request more than 3 or 4 photos during a full assessment. So if it's an hour or a 2-hour assessment, it's 4 photos that they've got to take, and it will not take them more than 10 seconds per photo that they need to take. So it's roughly a 40 seconds that they would be taken out of their assessment, or where they would not be able to focus on the assessment. But that's easy to overcome if a lecturer maybe wants to add a few extra minutes at the end of the assessment to counter that. We also have a verification code feature where we link it with the LMS that the institution is using. So if it's an LMS-based online assessment with multiple choice questions or true and false questions, or where it's a fill in the word or essay type question on the LMS itself, we've also got a feature where we link that student with the LMS to ensure that the student writing the assessment on the LMS is actually the student that's sitting in front of the Invigilator application, so that somebody is not writing the assessment on the LMS in one location and the student that they're writing for is just sitting with the application and performing the prompts on the application itself. And then we do that by requesting a verification code on the LMS assessment at a specific time. And for that, the student would then have to press a button on the application whereby a 4-digit one-time PIN is generated, and that one-time PIN then needs to be entered into the LMS assessment within a certain period of time. So that is in a nutshell what the application does. So it's not a full proctoring solution where students are watched all the time, but we are comfortable that it does address the biggest risks that we associate with online assessments. Now, at this point, I'm going to hand over to Neil, who's just going to start off and explain how we then got in touch with Rhodes University and how we then started doing a pilot with Rhodes University at the end of last year, and what their experience was of this application during the course of the pilot program. So Neil, I'm going to hand over to you to take it from here.
Thank you, Yuri. Yes, and I think Yuri has already captured exactly most of the reasons why we looked at I think we looked at about 30 or 40 different options by the time we got to the Invigilator. And we all know that the data is a very big, it's probably one of the biggest words of 2020. But in any case, and I think one of the biggest drivers is that, most lecturers were very worried about the academic integrity of exams, about timed assessments like tests, and there was a real drive to find ways to discourage cheating and other kinds of academic dishonesty. And I think that was one of the big drivers that obviously brought us to here, to piloting in the Invigilator. And I guess this has been debates that happened right around all higher education institutions. I don't know about you guys, but as far as I know, 2020 was also the year with the most cases of plagiarism, more so than any other year. And, you know, discussions with colleagues elsewhere have also indicated that a dramatic rise in plagiarism. And yeah, it'd be interesting to find out why. But yeah, most importantly, we had a lot of requests and a lot of discussions with the people that we support around, you know, a need for some form of invigilation. Others, you know, certain departments tried it with Zoom. There were just a whole bunch of different, you know, solutions or handmade solutions being tried. We then decided to try it out with 2 courses, both of them second year. One is a second year law course with about 250 students. The other one was a commerce subject. And I think that was also about 200 or 300 students. And unfortunately that failed. And I think that comes up to the next slide of why it worked in the law group instead of the commerce group, and that was around the initial mediation. You know, we were very fortunate in that we could have a meeting with Yuri and some other of these team members, and we could have a, you know, open and honest, frank discussion about, you know, what the Invigilator is and how we can implement it. And unfortunately, the commerce lecturer went out after that meeting, sent an email to his class, and, you know, it created chaos instead of creating buy-in. But in any case, I think the big success that we had is, you know, how we collaborated with the lecturer where we could implement. You know, we created a introduction to the Invigilator, why we need it, why we want to pilot it with this course specifically, and we gave them very clear instructions. Yeah, I think what makes it difficult is when you pilot anything, we actually had a very big debate about should we make it forced or should we make it voluntary. We decided to go voluntary. So, you know, the use of the Invigilator would not affect you negatively as a student. What also made this exam different, and I think this was a strategy many lecturers use, that we just try an open book exam, and that was done with an assignment on Moodle, on our LMS. We then also collected some feedback from students afterwards to see how it went and what their perceptions, you know, measuring things like, you know, surveillance, etc. All the issues that Yuri has mentioned before as well. We then also did our supplementary exam in January. We also used it for the supplementary exam, which was, yeah, indeed also a good experience. Okay. I think then I'm going to hand over to Nicola. Sorry, Nicola.
Thanks, Neil. And just to add to Neil's discussion, I think the sort of culture of a university plays a big role. It's not one, you know, I think it's a university, Rhodes is a university where students have, you know, quite a lot of voice, and the expectation that that voice is listened to. It's not like we had seen some other institutions and heard that they had just said, you know, told their students, you will be using this. And if you are not using this, your marks won't be counted. Whereas with us, you know, we had to be very clear, you know, in our information and how we were, you know, mediating this to students. And it was one of the students actually who were part of that commerce group that posted on the SRC, I think, Facebook page. You know, that sometimes people can, you know, really escalate something if it's not communicated properly initially. So that I think was really, really important. So here we had an announcement on the course site that we actually sent out on behalf of the lecturer. I said, you know, look at the tab, at all the info. And it's, that we had to say, why are we doing this? And we're gonna, we're sharing information. There's a demo page so they could actually test it out beforehand. We shared, why we're piloting it in this information. Yeah, and if they were unable to participate after having read this, that they contact their lecturer. Okay, so it's very much about how do you get buy-in, how do you communicate to students, and I think the big thing is that students actually do care about fairness. So saying we are doing this for you, and that this it's in your basically interests actually to participate. Okay. So I said, yeah, we will be piloting an exciting new app called the Invigilator in this course. Your participation and experiences will help inform the rollout of the app across the university next year. The app is currently being used at a number of South African universities. And yeah, telling them a little bit more about it, and that there was going to be opportunities to give feedback later. Okay, next slide, please, Neil. Yes, so, and the order in which we did things, we had a meeting between ourselves and Yuri and the two lecturers, and we spoke about, the tool as well as the assessment design around the Invigilator. So would it work for our open book time assessment, for example? And Yuri also provided feedback on our initial message that went to students and had to send us a QR code, which was for the demo test. We got links to a video and guide for students with FAQs that Yuri also provided to us. And we shared the student feedback with Yuri then in return. And yeah, we had a few online meetings and discussed the experience. We then, between EdTech, the lecturer and the students, we assisted the lecturer with setting up the announcement and then responding to student queries, in addition to the dedicated WhatsApp channel that Invigilator has. And the lecturer also reinforced the importance of this pilot and how it would be, couched it in terms of integrity of assessments. And that they would have the opportunity to test it out beforehand, before using it during the exam, and to get a bit of, essentially buy-in during a Zoom session. And I think that was really key, that it had that integrity focus rather than here's this new tool and yes, it's exam time, but this is the first time you're going to use it, And yes, Invigilator provided a WhatsApp help desk. And then after the pilot, we actually wrote a draft report where we reflected on information and feedback. And this report then went to departments, the academic departments at Rhodes, with questions for feedback. And after this, both the questions and the feedback and the report were shared with our teaching and learning committee. Okay, next slide, please. And I think is on the feedback. Yes, so many of you who were, especially those lecturing last year, you will know that 2020 was a very difficult year for getting feedback from students generally. So we only had 37 students share about their experience. Most of them made use of the app on an Android smartphone, and less than half via the iOS app, so Apple smartphone. 2 used the web version on a phone, and another 2 used the laptop. The majority of the students actually rated the app as very easy to use. And we realized in our feedback that yes, there were techie issues, did the app work? How easy were the instructions? But then there were also sort of deeper questions. So the majority of students said yes, the instructions shared prior to the exam were very clear. And then they were also asked about whether the use of the app made them feel uncomfortable. We asked them about preferences regarding exam scenarios, thoughts on improving, and their thoughts around improving assessment at the university. What was interesting is that the students who had they actually had some issues with the students, those who did use it had issue with those who didn't. And they said, the app is something that had the potential to ensure fairness, but they also acknowledged that not all might be able to use it for this because of different circumstances. And the number of students who actually went to the lecture and said, look, we actually don't have a device, or because at that stage when we were piloting the software, they had not yet made the improvement yet that you could use a single device. So both to be to run their remote invigilation app and to take the, use the LMS to submit your assignment. So that was something that was, I think, one of the main things that came from the students. And what's fascinating, I think, is that by November last year, many lecturers assumed that students all had, by then, at least a laptop and a mobile phone. But feedback from students who said they weren't able to engage with the Invigilator app because they did not have a second device actually proved contrary to this. 2020 was a very difficult year. We don't know who needed to perhaps sell that one of their devices for money to feed families. Who knows? But it was quite revealing in that sense. We also realize a lot comes down to personal preferences. So preferences, people who prefer maybe a sit down or an online exam, experiences of taking exams in different settings in general, their views about assessment and fairness and integrity in relation to assessment, those are actually quite different. And it's very difficult to say, whether people say they're more nervous when taking exams in a physical setting or online. The students were asked if you could choose how to take exams, 18 of the 37 said they would prefer via the app, 16 said sit downs, and the rest said they actually don't mind. So there were a lot of times where there was this very, interesting split by a person, I think, which, is more personal preferences. And then other things that came up is we know that students would sometimes listen to recordings. So they would listen to their lecturers' recordings and review and regard these as part of the open book exam. But for the lecturer, this was not actually, regarded as open book. So what we see is also students' emerging understandings of open book and then assessment in general. So students also asked an open-ended question around what practices and resources do you think are needed to discourage cheating more broadly at the university? So this suggested approaches for discouraging cheating, but that no way, I think they acknowledged that no way was foolproof. Some also even questioned the legitimacy of these sit-down exams and what is actually being tested through this approach. So while the app was seen as, I think, a step in the right direction, they noted that technology can also be unpredictable, unequal, and can even sometimes add stress if things go wrong. And there were also those who mentioned punishment, consequences for those who cheat. So in a nutshell, this question really showed us that there's no easy solution to discouraging cheating. Next slide. So, sorry, I realized I didn't say next slide. And I was talking about all these lovely little quotes. So here you can see discouraging cheating is impossible. No method is foolproof. Okay, so every system you put in place can be beaten. Only so much a university can do. So very different perspectives. And I think really spoke to, what is the bigger issues here. And I think it's around, the traditional assessment and how the pandemic made that very, very difficult. And spoke to, I think, the bigger picture, which was fairness in general. All right, next slide, please, Neil. And I think you're going to talk next about the next two bits.
sorry, I just had a seance moment where I'm speaking to myself. We're all allowed one of those a week. Okay, yes. And, you know, then we also had to take some time back, you know, take a step back and look at what did we learn. And, you know, the first thing, it really helps when your developer is a lecturer himself using, or herself using the software for their own teaching. So, you know, we could see real examples. We were lucky enough to be able to have a look at that, but also to work, you know, in collaboration with somebody who's actually, you know, in the trenches. That really helped. We also realized that, again, like any software and any, you know, pilot or any launch of software, you know, partnerships are essential. And getting buy-in from lecturers and students is important. But also, I think the most important part is that onboarding and training that's responsive to the need and to the level of understanding of your students in their context is super important. Also, I think most importantly, plan for some extra support when introducing these new tools. Yeah, I think Nicola did the lion's share of supporting on this too, and it was quite a lot for one class to support. So I think, you know, implementing something like this at a larger scale would require some more hands on deck. What we definitely learned about our students is that, you know, to make the assumption that 2 devices are owned by everyone, I think is a bit difficult. I don't think that was the case, and I don't think that's the case now. I do think that it could be easier to get a phone than to get a computer and a ADSL or, you know, whatever internet connection. Definitely yes. And then also that fairness matters. You know, for some students in the feedback, as Nicola mentioned, you know, if we are using it, everybody should use it. So from the pilot, of course, that would be an outcome. But it's also just in terms of fairness of assessment, so that we protect the integrity of the degree, but not just for our degree in the institution, but also for the students themselves. Nicola, back to you.
Thanks, Neil. We also learned some interesting things about technology, and often a word that is used is intervention. And I think, you know, when you're piloting or implementing a new app, it's not really an intervention. We've got to think about it as a partnership. You've got to really work hard to get that, you know, pay attention to the social stuff, get that, you know, have your lecturer informed and that they understand what's going on, and your students, the students as well. You've got to be able to also plan for tech fails. So who should the students contact? Those kinds of things. You know, you really have to have, I mean, we spent a lot of time on that initial announcement. You know, you've got to design that mediation, and you've also got to pay attention to whether the design of the online assessment actually fits the tool. And I know Yuri is going to tell us a bit more about that. The other thing, more specifically about piloting a new tool during the pandemic in a high stakes situation, I mean, it was the exam period, is that you need a test run or a low stakes opportunity first for students to feel comfortable. You also need, I mean, we saw the importance of short, clear resources and FAQs that can guide the students. And some of the questions that students shared showed that they didn't actually read the information that we shared with them. So it might have been even a bit too heavy. And I think the most important one is that support is essential. The tool alone is not enough. Sometimes people assume that the tool does the work, but I think really the tool is probably does the smallest part of the work. Okay, next slide. And I think we've got Yuri. Yes, there we go. Over to you.
Thanks, Nicola. So, ladies and gentlemen, as an academic myself, something that we learned very quickly is that you cannot rely on technology alone. And as we have seen, that there will always be ways and means around technology. So students that are really clever will find ways and means around it. So yes, technology will mitigate the risk and will ensure that a lot of students that would have taken a chance to cheat won't do so anymore. But that cannot be your only tool to use to mitigate the risks in online assessments. Therefore, as a lecturer, I realized that it's very important how I design my online assessments. And this is something that every institution has to understand as well. Technology alone cannot sufficiently address the risk of academic dishonesty, and lecturers need to make a mind shift to assessing in an online environment. So what I've seen with all of the universities that we've been dealing with since, and in my own university and in my own department, where I'm the program coordinator for one of our qualifications, there are still lecturers that just has one paper for all students, where they just give out one paper and all the students write the same paper. Lecturers also give students too much time to complete an assessment, where they open up an assessment for 12 hours. And the problem with that is the moment that you open up an assessment for 12 hours, you're opening yourself up for a lot of risk. At the University of Johannesburg, in my department, we've moved back to a single time slot. Everybody has to write at the same time. It's not open for hours and hours on end, because unfortunately by doing that, you are opening yourself up to students acting unethically and helping one another because they've got time to do so. We have gone and we've moved to a system where we use pools of questions. So where not everybody gets exactly the same question paper, we go to a lot of trouble to ensure that the questions are set at the same standard, but that it's not exactly the same. We also have questions where we've got 3 or 4 pool questions. So where we take the same question, and I'm lecturing taxation, so I'm in the commerce field, and where we change very small things in the question. So at the first glance, it looks exactly the same as the question of my friend, but we've made some very small changes to it. And then in the marking process, we know which students got which pool question. And if you now are making use of of certain amounts in your answer that was not in the question we gave you, we know that you got that question from a friend and that you did not do that specific question by yourself. So that worked really well for us as well. So at the end of the year, we as a lecturing team, my colleague and I, we were really comfortable that we really eliminated the risk of academic dishonesty by using the Invigilator application, so using the technology, and together with carefully designing our assessment papers. So maybe just to give you a little bit of background, so I'm lecturing 1,200 students at the University of Johannesburg, and we caught 86 students who acted unethically and who got assistance from friends and fellow students. So unfortunately, there is a massive risk in the online assessment space, and therefore we cannot just sit back as lecturers and say, we're just going to leave it. We've got a responsibility, and therefore we have to use what we can in order to mitigate these risks, to protect the academic integrity of our assessments. Something that I also think is a big solution, and it's very important for lecturers to upskill themselves with regards to what their specific LMS can offer. So what are the different types of questions I can ask? So we learned a lot. So at UJ, we use Blackboard, and we've learned so much about Blackboard in the process, and how to assess and what type of questions we can ask, and how we can use Blackboard to assist us in this. And that goes for any LMS, whether you're using Moodle or you're using Sakai or you're using Canvas or whatever solution you are using. Make sure you know how to use it to your best ability. So what I'm trying to get to is this is a team effort, and that lecturers need to unfortunately invest themselves in the process. And I can just say, as an academic myself, it was a really rewarding process. And I'm not saying it's rewarding because we caught 86 people. I'm saying it's rewarding because of the fact that I know that the module that I presented and the assessments that I set was up to scratch and it was up to standard, and that I will not be sending people or students into a job market that is not ready to do so. So yeah, maybe just back to the last bullet on this slide I want to address is So too many of my colleagues just got a normal scan and upload paper where they present all of these students with the same PDF document, and students have to scan and upload their responses at the end. There's so much that you can do, and we have a firm belief that you have to find a balance between scan and upload responses and to online assessment questions. And obviously it's going to depend on the discipline that you teach. Certain disciplines leans itself towards certain types of questions, and we do understand that it's going to differ from discipline to discipline, but lecturers have a responsibility to invest some time into this. And as I say, as a lecturer myself, it's a really rewarding process. So if we move to the next slide, Neil, I'm just going to touch on where are we now with the application. So you might have seen that Nicola has mentioned that one of the big drawbacks that we experienced last year was that students were not allowed to leave the application. And that unfortunately was a problem because there are so many students who only have a cell phone. So they only have one device, and they've got to use this device to either complete the online assessment on, or they have to use this device to actually read the PDF document or the PDF paper that they've got to write out with pen and paper by hand. And therefore, because students couldn't leave the application, we had the problem where students only had one device and they therefore couldn't use the Invigilator because they had to use that device to actually read their paper or actually complete their paper. We introduced the app to UNISA last year with about 70,000 students at the end of the year. And we had a similar experience there where it became a very easy excuse to say, I only have one device. So what we've subsequently done is we've gone and we've built a browser into the application itself so that a student that only has one device can now use that one device to use the Invigilator application, but they can also access the LMS to write the assessment on or to access the PDF paper on the LMS. So since last year to this year, we've made great improvements to the application. And one of those is definitely that students with a single device can now use the application for both the LMS and to run the Invigilator application. Another set of feedback that we got from UNISA, which was very valuable, was that lecturers that did make use of scan and upload papers, so where students had to write out the test by hand and then scan their responses and upload, actually abused the scan and upload time. So at UNISA, they were very lenient on the scan and upload time at the end because many students live in rural areas and students do not have access to strong connections, or they had to travel somewhere where they can upload their scripts to the university LMS. But unfortunately, if they would give students an hour to upload their papers, many students continued writing for a further 45 minutes into the upload time, and they didn't stop when the actual assessment time was over, which obviously was a huge discrepancy. Because students, it wasn't a fair system. So what we've subsequently done is we have built in a functionality into the application that for scan and upload papers, once the time runs out on the application, so once the students, once their time is up, they are prompted by the application to take a photo of each page of their answer sheet. And they've then got a limited time of 5 minutes to do that. And what then happens is that photo is then uploads onto your lecturer dashboard, and the lecturer then has access to where the student was at when the time was up. So should a student then continue writing, even though into the scan and upload time, we already have a copy of where the student was at when the time was actually finished. And therefore that serves as a major deterrent in stopping students from actually continuing writing, even though the writing time is finished. So that we think is a major improvement, because that completely eliminates that risk of students abusing the scan and upload time. Also, where students miss the submission deadline on the university LMS for whichever reason, it's now very easy. So once a student emails the lecturer to say, I couldn't upload, or I've had some sort of issue and I missed the upload deadline, it's very easy for the lecturer to go onto the Invigilator dashboard and to go and have a look at the script photos that were uploaded. We convert it into PDF, and the lecturer can download the full script straight from our dashboard. So any discrepancies with regards to late uploads are now also taken out of the equation, because we've got a copy of the student's script when the time is up, because of the photos that they take. Lecturers can even download all of these papers that students took photos of in bulk. So we've got institutions that will mark straight from the application now. So where they download all of the photos that were taken by the students, actually download those PDF scripts, because we convert all of these photos to PDF scripts, and they can mark straight from that, and immediately they know that students could not abuse the scan and upload time. We've also built in a demo test upon registration. So students immediately, when they register for the application, they get taken through a demo test on their device to show them exactly what's going to happen. So once again, we're trying to take out a lot of the unknown so that students know what to expect, that it's not foreign to them, and that it doesn't create anxiety during an assessment. So once they've registered, they do a calibration test to make sure their device works properly, that we take them through how to take a selfie, how to take photos of specific items. We show them how to upload pictures of their script at the end. So by the time that they've registered for the application, they've already been taken through it. So lastly on this slide, so the Invigilator is most suited towards timed online assessments and quizzes. So if it's a fully online assessment, you can use the Invigilator application with great success, and also with scan and upload papers where students are expected to actually write out the answers with pen and paper, and then scan and upload it for marking. Personally, in my module, we use a combination of the two. So about half of our papers are online assessments, so online type of questions on the LMS, and then the other half for the more integrated questions, we then use the scan and upload format. So that in a nutshell is basically where we are at the moment. So we truly feel that the application is really an amazing tool at this stage of the game. It's a game changer in our context and in our environment, where we literally have got no other tools available to mitigate the risk of online assessments. What I am going to do as well, I'm going to share a YouTube video in the chat now. That is a 13-minute demo video of the application where the people can actually see exactly how the application works, and just to give you a better understanding of how it works. We're not going to bore you with that demo video today, but you're more than welcome to access that YouTube video to actually have a look at it. I'm going to hand back to my colleagues from Rhodes, to Nicola and Neil, and they're just going to discuss where they are now in the process of rolling out the application at Rhodes University. Thanks, Nicola and Neil.
Cool, thanks, Yuri. All right, so I think one of the big things that we learned, and that we're also seeing here, especially through Yuri's feedback, it's important to know, what the tool, what is the situation that this tool is best suited to. It's your timed online quizzes, assignments. It's definitely, one of the things I think which we got from the lecturers is that it's not suited to all courses or subjects, and you've got to actually use it as appropriate, as well as, in a low stakes assessment situation first, so the students can get comfortable with it. Then I'd also, just gauging from the chat, I want to mention that it's not just about tools and knowing what tools, suits which situation, but I think university also needs a strategy for remote assessment. And this is something that we luckily had. And we were already supporting lecturers, involved in supporting them with remote assessment, and already, I think, attuned to a lot of the issues. Neil, you want to add to that?
Yeah. I think the most important part is, and I think Yuri also emphasized that, is that you need that strategy, that any tool is beatable. So, it's about how you combine your assessment strategy with a tool like the Invigilator, which would definitely determine the success of that. But yeah, it's definitely also, you need to think about, and we also still have to think about, how do we roll this out bigger? What is our strategy going to be? Are we going to go faculties, or are we going to, what is our strategy? Which is something that we also still have to plan for the scaling. And yeah, Nicola, sorry, back to you.
Yeah, I think we will be rolling it out in the second term, which starts in the beginning of May. And I think we've at least through the pilot found the niche for what is the kind of assessments where this works well or where the need is. So yeah, and then the other thing, when you actually sign up for the tool, there's an option for a premium support. There's an additional cost. And for us, this is actually very, very important because we're a team. It's myself and Neil, and we've got 2 half-time assistants. And we've realized how much, just with one course, supporting one course for a pilot, how much support is actually needed. So I would say, people, if you're ever implementing new tools, don't just pay attention to the tool, also pilot to get a sense of how much support is involved. Yeah. And next slide, this is where you can look at, I think, the website for the Invigilator, where you can find out more. And I know Yuri's also shared a YouTube video. And lastly, if anyone has any questions for us. And I know folks have been really good about responding in the chat. And Irene, I see you want people to share some feedback in this feedback form.
Any questions? I'm sure some of the colleagues have got a few questions. We're more than willing to answer your questions. Ingrid, I see you've raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. I have 2 questions specifically. The one is I've been reading a lot of studies on the effectiveness of remote proctoring, and the data is really is quite contradictory. So either shows that there's no effectiveness, such small effectiveness that it's really not worth doing it, while some other studies have shown that there is some effectiveness. So what studies and in which manner have you shown effectiveness? And then the question related to effectiveness, what studies do you have in terms of anxiety? I had a friend that ended up using this app to write her exam for UNISA. And she said she was so anxious because she constantly felt that she has to check to make sure that she's not missing a prompt to do something, that it really, this is an older person, she's not young and inexperienced, she has all of the tools that you could need, but her anxiety level really rose with this. So that's kind of the 2 things that I'm interested in, is effectiveness and anxiety. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
As I have explained to you, as a lecturer myself, I have experienced the effectiveness of using technology together with a very specific design of my assessment papers. And the proof for me is just in the fact that out of 1,200 students, we had 86 transgressions for my modules last year. So those were 86 students where we had clear-cut evidence of students acting unethically during an assessment that we took through a judicial process. And that is, as I say, that's my own experience with using these 2 things. So firstly, the application, and secondly, the design of my paper. So that in itself is, for me, as a lecturer myself that's been lecturing for 13 years, ample proof that there is definitely merit in using these kinds of tools. The second thing with regard to the anxiety, I definitely think that when a student uses the application for the first time, there could be a level of anxiety. Anything that's new creates anxiety. And as Nicola has mentioned, we really recommend that lecturers introduce it for a low stakes assessment, or even for a completely demo test where there's actually no stakes at all, just to make sure that students are really comfortable with how this tool works. And as I've explained to you earlier on, in any assessment that I set for the application, I never expect of a student to take more than 4 photos, of which 2 of the photos are selfies that they've got to take. One photo would be a photo of their ID or student card, And lastly, it could be a photo of the question that they're busy with, just so that I can make sure I can link them to that script. So in an hour or 2 hour assessment, having to take 4 photos that will not take you longer than 40 seconds to do, and you're being notified by the application. So there's no reason for you to keep on watching your phone all the time, because you're notified when that is supposed to happen. I definitely think that after you've used the application more than once, there's no reason whatsoever to be anxious. And I think if we've got to weigh that against the risk that we as academics are running with regards to online assessments taking place remotely, I personally feel that it's not that invasive, and that the anxiety is something that I, as the lecturer, just have to manage, and I've got to make sure that my students are comfortable. I hope that answers your question or questions.
Yeah, I can also add something to that. So we were very keen on, well, we saw the need to try and encourage more of a trauma-informed approach. That's why we really, aim to be more transparent and, say, and create a safe space. So things like, this is not going to have negative implications for your grades, for example. So how do you also not just implement or pilot a tool, but also do it in a particular way that can potentially reduce anxiety? I can't give you the literature at the moment for stuff on test taking and stress and whatnot. But yeah, I think it's important for lecturers. It's not just about a test or a new tool. It's also how you design the circumstances around that and mediate it that makes it either less or more stressful. Pranavan, I see you've got your hand up as well.
Yes, hello, Dr. Nicola. It's Pranavan from Durban University of Technology. I'd just like to say that I've attended a presentation by you, and I'm convinced. I just need your assistance and possibly guys from IFO to convince my EXCO committee in our faculty. I've been trying to get them to accept technology like this, and the latest that I heard is that we need to pilot it. So I've offered them my course. I have about 30 postgrad students. I've been trying, it would have been too much to ask for about 300-400 students. Way forward, please, Dr. Nicola. Thank you.
Sorry, Pranavan, I'm not sure what you're asking me exactly, but maybe you can clarify for me.
Way forward from your side or from the guys from IFO, so that we could implement it at DUT and hopefully convince our faculty EXCO members to, go with this. Maybe you guys could do a little demo with us, or have a little Zoom meeting so that we can have one-on-one. I will share the YouTube videos. I have shared the link to them, but I need a little bit more convincing, and I don't think I'm the right person for it.
I've also sneakily been sharing our draft report, so I can share that with you. So and I know in IFL Corp does a lot of Zoom sessions. I think the big thing is piloting is very important, and especially with a smaller group.
Yeah.
I mean, we're actually piloting another product as well at the moment, and it's really important, I think, because people with the pandemic were implementing things at such a speed, not always piloting, sometimes wasting money. So it's really, I think, what you're saying is really important, that you pilot first, test, work out all the snags. But I'll share my email address with you, and then I can send you the report.
One of the EXCO members, at your convenience, I would love it if you could do Zoom meeting with us. Thank you.
Pranavan, what we'll do as well, Romana and myself will get in touch with you, and we can set up a call to discuss the way forward, and to discuss how best we can go about a pilot program at your institution, and how we can address the issue with your EXCO.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I see there's a question from Ingrid. Ingrid, you say, one last question, Yuri, you mentioned you use AI for facial recognition. How did you verify there's not racial bias in the artificial intelligence? So Ingrid, what I can tell you there is that we are working with a very well-known company in the United States, a world leader in this area, a company called ID R&D. I can also share their details with you for you to if you'd like to do some research on them. But they are, well, we've done a lot of research on this, and in my opinion, they're one of the best companies in the world with regards to facial recognition, and therefore they go to a lot of trouble to ensure that we do not discriminate against any race, and that especially darker skin tone people are not how can I say that they're not discriminated against. So you're more than welcome to reach out to me on that as well. But that is why we are partnering with one of the world leaders to ensure that that doesn't happen. Any more questions? Right, Nicola, it seems like we've dealt with all of the questions.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I also see, it seems like that from the chat as well. Just a reminder to please fill in the form with some feedback that Irene requested. I'll just find the link again and pop that in. Yeah, but thank you everyone for joining the conversation today. And Eiffel Corp are really great to work with. And yeah, I mean, we've had really good experiences. We meet with vendors often, and I can tell you some of them are a real nightmare. And if anyone was working in EdTech and making decisions around buying products and, you know, or how can I say, being in an EdTech position, you are harassed on a daily basis by platforms, providers. Yeah, and it's so nice to, I think, chat to people that have a bit of pedagogy as well, and also are local and understand, you know, have similar constraints and understand the South African and higher education space. And I think more importantly, not just South Africa, but the universities where you have students and staff with resource constraints. Yeah, and I just also want to say thank you to Yuri and Neil for co-presenting, and for Emerge Africa for allowing us this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nicola and Neil. Maybe I can just mention, just for a little bit of context, I don't think everybody attending knows this, but we at the Invigilator have partnered with Eiffel Corp. So Eiffel Corp is our official resellers, and they are a very well-known company in the educational technology space, and they will assist us with the implementation and onboarding. So yeah, so we're working very closely with Eiffel Corp. Thank you very much for the opportunity to chat to everybody today. I think it's always very stimulating for me, and I love to speak to like-minded academics, and we are in unprecedented times, and I think it's awesome that we can learn from one another, and that we can share ideas on platforms like these.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day further. And yes, I think Jakob, you can end the recording.